So welcome to another episode. Today we're doing bridge yapping, but in real life because we're all in Denver. Let's start with like quick intros.
I'm Tom, the founder of Gas.zip. We're a very small baby bridge with high coverage. We're here every week. Angus.
I'm Angus. Well, I'm Stargate Foundation Lead. We're a liquidity pool-based bridge and OFT-based bridge that recently launched Hydra to a bunch of new chains.
Nice stuff. My name is Vishwa. I'm the co-founder at Anera. In the past, I've been known as the only doxed cross-chain solver. But now we're sort of announcing our new protocol. It's a tokenized prime broker, which is just a bridge for big boys.
Awesome. And I am Arjun. I work in research at Li-Fi. So how we're going to do this, we have two teams here, Angus and Vishwa on one team, Tom and I on the other. The teams do not really mean too much. We're just trying to conclude if we actually have an opinion on something.
Sure.
How we're going to do this, we'll have 10 statements, and then each team would, at the end of the discussion, try to decide if they agree with the statement or they disagree with the statement.
So as a team, we have to agree. We
Yes.
have to be
Goal.
unanimous.
Yes.
Okay.
I see. Okay.
Yes.
Also, can I say the quiet part out loud? Did
Please.
you just split up the teams so the Browns and the Whites would be segregated? What's that?
No comment. Okay. The first statement, right? Today, intents are the best design for building bridges.
Okay, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I disagree, but it's just so much of I'm so sick of the "it depends" answer. So let me put it this way. I think it makes a lot of sense when your chain is going to be interfacing with end users and you want them to be able to get from anywhere as quickly as possible, and it's small amounts, right? So your expectation here is it's a retail focused initiative that you're undertaking, and for that I think it makes sense, but it just doesn't scale. And we're saying this as someone that has done this. We've done close to 100 million volume in cross-chain solving. The economics are not great for you as a solver that's coming in as a profit maximizing third party unless you're doing something else. And so for me, it's hard to imagine any model that works without you either being relay or sort of going higher up the stack and like vertically integrating solving into the capability that is connecting to the front end.
I agree with my teammate. I think intent-based bridges are not bridges. They are retail-facing swap products that allow users to swap one asset for another, sometimes on different chains.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the whole selling point of intent-based bridges is that the solvers do the hard part in the background, which is the actual bridging. And so any solver will tell you that they will use Binance as a bridge, or CCTP as a bridge, or Stargate as a bridge. And so intent-based protocols are not bridges. They are just retail-facing convenience products.
Okay, so I pretty much agree with what both of you said, but then why do we have teams only building intent-based bridges? Like any
Because
new
it's
bridge
a
that has
lot
come out.
easier.
Okay,
It's a lot easier.
But that cannot be the only reason, right?
Well, it's a lot easier, and I think they're both. I think you're both very clearly right in that it doesn't scale. It's very difficult to scale it, right? And it depends what your use case is, right?
Yeah.
Like my particular use case right now is precisely to stay for small orders, right? And in that world, it's like the perfect answer for that, right? But grow this, try to scale that even, try to get this even to 2 ETH limits, 3 ETH limits, right? And it's kind of what Relay is doing to some extent, but then, your coverage starts getting much smaller into the dozens of chains, right? It starts becoming much harder to start doing that. So for small order flow, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And for anything else, it's probably near impossible.
So do we agree on the fact that it's the best model for small order flow? Like small-sized orders?
I think it's very convenient for users who
Okay.
are swapping small sizes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole pitch of them kind of letting the user get their assets in a couple seconds, and then again the solver's doing the hard part in the background is probably the way that it should be for retail size.
Yeah.
I just don't. It doesn't scale. It's not a bridge.
I think I agree with the sort of, we should figure out with a better term for intent protocols that do sort of cross-chain fills in the same asset. Bridge seems a little bit sort of sure, mechanistically it's doing the same thing, which is value transfer, but I do think that Angus brought this up in the debate yesterday, is that the sort of underlying mechanism of verification is still a message, and the sort of credibility that you get from that message to me is what's the immutable aspect of the sort of bridge, right? That's the interop part here. I think the stuff that we do on top is a little bit more like cross-chain money markets than it actually is bridging per se. So
Yeah.
So any shouts on what is the best bridging model?
I think there's only one bridge that exists today. There are very few teams building canonical bridges between different L1s.
But is liquidity-based bridging dead? Like the pool-based model? Because there's only one today.
but it's also at the top of the volume chart.
Yeah, and it's I've thought about this a bunch, and I'm like, I don't even know how you would attempt to replicate Stargate if you like wanted to today.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? It's almost like you just had this like one shot historically to do this, where you had the sale, there was like protocol raised funds, like the stars kind of aligned, the money stayed, like people came in at the right time. Like it'd be really difficult to try to replicate that today.
There's only one that I think compares to the scale and like arguably is bigger than Stargate, or like can be bigger than Stargate, but it's not in the context of DeFi. So Angus looking at me like, who was he talking about?
Who is this newcomer to the liquidity pool?
Let me explain. So Copper has something called Clear Loop, right? So Clear Loop is a sort of off-exchange network effect, just that connects these centralized exchanges. What they've actually got is they've got the centralized exchanges to post collateral with them, so that their custody clients can trade without their funds ever being on exchange. Now, the underlying assets sitting with Copper right now are not being rehypothecated for any type of yield whatsoever, but we're talking about like assets to the tunes of like billions of dollars, right? So when you're mirroring like USDT or USDC, it is entirely plausible that Copper can, for Windows, switch out from USDT, USDC to like SUSDE, or like even just money market funds or any of that stuff, and be able to earn a significant amount of yield. The underlying sort of liquidity rebalancing between centralized exchanges also happens through Clear Loop. And I think the scale of that is pretty large, right? So I think in some sense what we would end up doing at Anera is connecting something like Clear Loop to something like Stargate, so that bridging the gap between the two.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're trying to do what Stargate's doing in DeFi, I would say wish you all the best.
I mean, liquidity is the moat, and Stargate has all the liquidity right now.
Free money is a tough thing to compete with, and I know this is having been like a solver, and just like, okay, what can I do price-wise? And then this guy's just like, nothing.
That is ultimately why intense protocols will always hit an upper bound. And we were having this debate yesterday with Joshua from Aori, who said that eventually, like the Citadels of the world will come in and maybe they'll hold hundreds of millions of dollars across all different chains. I don't see that happening, not without like a significant increase in order flow. And hopefully that does happen.
Okay, so let's just say all of us disagree that there's another model out there that's probably better than intent-based bridging.
I would agree. For actual bridging, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the next statement, intent-based bridging space is still very reliant on protocol-run solvers. Is that true or not?
Tom, why don't you start?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. You have the Acrosses of the world, right? But very much so. I think.
Across is probably the only one that has any significant participation from anyone outside of the risk clubs there, which does 70% of the volume on the protocol. So I would have to agree. I think the numbers kind of point you that way.
What's your opinion? I think everyone wants to know your opinion, because you're probably the only one who's not running like a solver for your own protocol in a way.
Yeah, I mean, we ran one as charity for everybody else. And I think there were some days where we were just making like an insane amount of money, where it was like really stupid, especially in the beginning with some of the bridges that we were talking about yesterday, but we won't give them any clout on this. At that initial phase, it was just like, okay, this is extremely easy money. But as the sort of aggregator competition comes down to price, sort of he started cranking up how competitive they wanted to be on the hot routes. You as a solver inside of Across have no price power whatsoever, right? So you are effectively filling a quote that's being promised by Across, and at that point, I'm assuming that they're sort of pulling data to see for these routes what's Stargate's price. So we have no sort of price discussion whatsoever, in which case it's just like, even if we're filling, like, what are we, we are basically an extension of the protocol owned solver, right? We're just a balance sheet that gets to keep some bips.
So like tying the first question and this one, like we're seeing a lot of intent-based bridges come to market.
Yeah.
And a lot of these teams are running their own solvers, right? So is this the right direction that we're going into, or is this just like, this is how you actually build it today? There's no other way to do it.
Define the right way. Is it the most crypto-aligned, decentralized?
Is it the best way, or is it just like the only solution we have today?
Like, should we say pragmatic versus does this scale? I think the whole sort of like YC theory of do unscalable things first applies here.
Yeah.
I do think this is
Yeah.
this is probably the smart thing to do, because I think as soon as you are thinking about like potentially you're a chain that wants to work with Stargate, but Stargate has like just so much demand, and you don't necessarily get to work with them. Across has so much demand, you don't necessarily get to work with them. And so if you're basically saying my UX depends on people's ability to get in and out from various venues, then I think pragmatically this is the right thing for you to do. Relay has done a good job of productizing it, and I think taking it higher up the stack. But yeah, if you're a chain, you definitely want to go to market with this one way or the other. And I think maybe given that we're in a world where so many chains are coming out, it does create this sort of unique opportunity for more teams to pop up. I just don't know how big it is, how big this opportunity gets, because certainly you have to do something else after this.
Okay. Any other comments? But I think we can all agree that it's all protocol run solvers for the most.
Yeah, it's all protocol run for the most part. And, it's not necessarily like, everyone I've spoke to in regards to that runs their own solver as well, for the most part will tell you, like, they don't want to be doing this, and like how much of that is posturing versus like not is like depending on who you speak to probably, right?
Yeah.
But like there is some element, at least from us, like I don't necessarily want to be doing this, right? Like we weren't in like the business of suddenly being like fulfilling order flow, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't why I started this. It was why it was just like it was a product of this is the solution at hand in order to accomplish like what you want to accomplish with the product, right? So there was like a while where I was running around like begging, just like, hey, does anyone want this, right? And like nobody wants it, right? So it's like, okay, you kind of have to do it.
That was kind of how Intents were born as a solution to bridging, was because like nobody wanted to. We needed like a stopgap solution. Like nobody wants to do
That's
this
not true
long-term.
though. Like the Connects model 4 years ago was basically this, but like different names and different like branding.
Yeah.
Also, Stargate V1 was very expensive. And
Yes.
they created an opportunity for something like Across and Intents to become mainstream because of how expensive
Yeah.
V1 was.
Yeah. I mean, Intents were always faster and cheaper, and then they were no longer always cheaper.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
now no longer always faster, depending on size.
Right,
So.
right. So
Okay.
V2,
So-
I think, was like props to V2.
The next statement, most interop standards won't go anywhere. A year from now, we'll forget about all of them.
You're talking about the 17th or the 18th standard?
20th. The one that launched, I don't know, maybe today or something.
Oh God, there's a standard launch today? Oh, thank
Maybe.
God. Jeez. No way.
I think it's very difficult to say. I was in the Ethereum Interop offsite the other day and kind of sitting with people talking about how to unify the interfaces of all these different messaging-based protocols, and I think it is a very valiant effort, but I don't know to what end it is happening. I don't think that necessarily having one interface actually solves the problem at hand. So I would agree with that statement.
I think Arjun did this in his talk yesterday at the Polymer event, where he just talked about how like standards don't work. As someone like Arjun has proposed so many standards and has been at the forefront of this conference. This is Arjun Bhuptani from Everclear, by the way, not Arjun from Li-Fi.
They know I'm not smart enough.
I do think it becomes hard, right? Because within the intent space, we gave comments on 2 standards over the last 16 months. One that was proposed by Essential, which was like a wider sort of mandate to account abstraction, and the other proposed by Across and Uniswap, which was this sort of like interface for solvers. And then it's just like, okay, the crux of the issue from a solver perspective was like, can you standardize rebalancing for me? If there's a standard that exists within Ethereum that standardizes rebalancing, and it uses some combination of ingenuity and cryptography to make it faster for solvers to rebalance, and that's a standard that I actually care about. Everything else to me was just like, let's just put stuff on ETH research. And funnily enough, I was telling Bo from Polymer this. I was just like, the amount of times we were asked to basically put something out on ETH research, and we just thought like it would be better to do something instead of putting it out on ETH research. And then Bo's awkwardly looking at me, he's like, yeah, I've been guilty of ETH research thing a couple of times. So
I think when people talk about solvers doing the hard part for the user, the hard part is not ingesting 5 parameters instead of 6 parameters in the event. The hard part is doing the balancing and the rebalancing and doing it in a timely manner. And so like the standardizing of an interface is not the hard part.
Okay, that was going to be my next statement, right? Like 7683 only solves a marginal problem for solvers. How do we feel about
I think
that?
marginal is even generous. I think last month the Across protocol pushed smart contract upgrades that changed all ingest, like basically every single event and the way that every function looked, and had 0 downtime because solvers can just change the way that they ingest events. And I don't think that had they been using 7683 from the start, there would have been less downtime because they didn't have downtime at all. So I think I don't even know if it does solve a problem. I'd be very curious, either of you, would it make a difference to your life if all of a sudden the interface across the protocol that you support was the same?
Oh, if you give us like an hour heads up, we would presumably just, rewrite like our middleware that ingests this and, check it out, looks good, okay, run it, ship it. That's what I think we talked about this a bit last week when we were doing the spaces, right? It was just like, it feels like it's, and maybe you need to like directionally, like it feels directionally correct that like, okay, you're trying to like solve like things in this realm,
Yep,
right?
yep.
But it feels a lot like you're solving a problem that maybe isn't
Like
a real
if there's
pain
order
point
flow,
here.
someone will do the work.
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah,
much.
like-
100%. Because to your point, it's not hard work. It's an hour's worth of work, if
Yeah.
that.
The only thing that you want to do to ensure like solvers don't get screwed in the process is making sure that you communicate any of these upgrades to them.
Sure.
Which I would say, like, in fairness to Across, especially, they do a great job of doing this because you get a message on Telegram. Like, I think every solver gets like a clear sort of message, clear steps of what you should do. Whereas in the past, there have been other protocols that haven't done it, and that's resulted in sort of like solvers having lost money through double filling of orders and stuff like that. So
But I think that's like very basic stuff that
It is basic,
literally
yeah.
everyone does. Like
correct.
if Stargate has an update, you would be in our Telegram group telling us, right?
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
you
Stargate
have
has immutable
dependencies.
contracts, but yeah.
A new chain. But yeah, I think that's a very standard practice. I do think like 7683 makes sense. Like it's good to have a standard,
yeah.
but any solver I talk to is not excited about it.
Yeah,
I don't know what to make of that.
I think the main question that I have, and this is maybe because my brain doesn't work in the direction of like launching standards, and my pedigree is not as an open source person, right? My co-founder is very good at this stuff, but I'm not. So I like to get down to the brass tacks of like what is the impact and ROI of implementing this standard. Is it exponential or is it linear? To me, it felt linear, and it felt like this work could happen without a standard as well. So it didn't seem like an exponential use of time. And I'm in the business of trying to apply my efforts and our team's efforts to the thing with the highest exponent. And it just didn't feel like 7683 or the one that Essential proposed before were exponential. And maybe that's a consequence of just the sheer amount of conflict in politics that it has to probably get like spec'd down to something that can be palatable to a broader audience. But that's my general feeling on standards. It's like, I don't know, like, is there something that's really going to, like become earth shattering from a solver perspective? Like solve the rebalancing problem for me, bring it down from 1 hour to 1 minute or 10 minutes. And that to me is exponential. So
100%.
Okay, so the next one is kind of like in the chain abstraction realm of the world. A lot of times I hear on Twitter that bridging front ends will die eventually once everything is abstracted. So I'm curious, as people who have a bridging front end, do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess the argument is that users going direct to a front end to move USDC from one chain to another will die. I hope that will be the case in the end state of DeFi and crypto. I don't think we are close to being there. And I think any of the solutions today that enable something like that struggle to get adoption because instead of like buying into the idea of going to a bridging front end, you buy into the idea of going to another front end and depositing capital into some like smart account, and like then they do it for you. Yeah. I think there's a lot of very impressive developer tooling that enables like the one-click deposit flows and zaps that helps and allows you to move away from a bridging front end. But I think ultimately front ends will continue to exist as they do in every industry.
Yeah, I mean, part of like it's just you can argue that like you're going to move away from a bridging front end, right? But kind of what you're just saying there, it's like it feels a lot like it's like what you're really saying is like current and your bridging front ends are going to die, and instead my bridging front end's going to win, right? Because it's like ultimately it's like what's kind of what's occurring here, right? Yeah. And like that might be the case, right? Like better bridging front ends and like bridging experiences that are better integrated into swapping wallets and etc. Like very well may win. Like that's like probably the direction it like should go, right? But there's a whole element of as well that if that's actually what you're trying to do, there is a level of like you're still building like a bridge and a bridge front end, right? And like it's still like maybe it's like wrapped around a wallet and it looks much more native and much more etc. Right? But you have to be doing all the things that like a regular bridge is still doing. Like you still need to like fill this order at the most competitive price, like at the best, like or else no one's going to use this thing, right? Like you need to compete on that lane. And if you can, then like great, like we've built better bridging front ends and like more power, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't think like the bridging front end ever dies. It's just like somebody else's bridging front end. It's like
I think it's not even that. It's like bridging front ends evolve into something more than bridging, right?
Yeah.
Like swaps are the next natural evolution.
I think it comes down to like what you're in the business of. So there's the protocol aspect, which is you're ingesting some user request and you're fulfilling that, and your protocol does it in different ways, whether it's through messaging or whether it's through intents, and there's a set of smart contracts that function and govern that behavior. But the manner in which that sort of user request is created is originated through a front end, and at some point the front end starts to decouple from the protocol, right? And you're just basically saying the front end pure plays originating user attention. What else can I sell the user?
Yeah.
So I had this conversation with someone from Uniswap, and I said, like, at what point does the Uniswap front end just start to decouple from the Uniswap protocol completely? Because you have distribution, you now have like this YouTube ads, there's like this TradFi level scale that Uniswap has. So if I'm Labs, right, like I'm Uniswap Labs, I want to be able to sell that user anything and everything, and in the back end, the protocol could be Hyperliquid, it could be Drift, it could be anything. It just doesn't matter anymore. Like that decoupling should happen. And I think that'll happen with maturity right now, because I think the labs teams and the protocols are still extremely correlated in crypto today. But 2 to 3 years from now, I don't expect that to happen, because like already things are getting harder in crypto. Like we are moving towards fundamentals, which means it's going to be harder for teams to survive. And then you're just like, okay, I need to turn on the fee switch or monetization, both for the protocol and for labs.
Yeah.
And when that happens, things will change.
I don't think the alignment changes though. Like Uniswap's front end will always be aligned with Uniswap, the protocol in the back end. And then that's where the limitations and the advantages also come in, I guess.
There's been some interesting flips of that narrative recently. I was going to say, like, this is kind of the Infinex play, right? Like, Infinex is just like, we will be the front end. Whatever you want to do, whatever we want to sell the user, we will just be the front end. You will come to our front end to do all of your bridging and swapping and DeFi protocols, which is, I think, like they've done a tremendous job at that.
Yeah.
But like the LFJ team, formerly known as Trader Joe, initially kind of used their front end. They had a lot of distribution on their front end. Initially used it as like an aggregator of the Trader Joe protocol, V2, V3, and liquidity books. And then now they aggregate on Solana and Berachain and all of these other places where like the Trader Joe protocol is not live and will not be live, but their front end offers that decoupled experience from the Trader Joe protocol. I think it's an interesting kind of switch.
Makes sense. Because like at the end of the day, the front end's North Star is just attracting more users.
It's 25 bips per trade. Doesn't matter what the trade is.
Yes.
That's
Actually,
what it
the
is.
best example of that might even be Jumper.
Yeah.
Jumper, there is no protocol, right?
Yeah.
LeFi.
Until there is one.
Yeah, but again, like LeFi boils down to other things.
That's what I'm
and
saying.
I guess like LeFi 2.0 will have part of Jumper.
Like everything that we would build as the infra provider for Jumper would of course allow it to expand, right? But because Jumper's North Star is maybe attracting the newest user on the newest chain, they would sometimes have to move faster.
Yeah.
So you can understand where like this, I would say long-term alignment, but short-term like misalignment would come in. But that's the decision for like both teams, I guess.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, just to round it out, I know we probably exceeded the threshold for this one. What I do think, and like why it's important to have the front end and the protocol kind of work together in the beginning, is that both kind of have like, in the beginning, they sort of, are very tightly coupled. And as you mature, it's okay for them to be a bit more loosely coupled. Case in point, if you have a protocol that works and works really well, we have to now think about crypto as a little bit less than PvP and zero sum, and as an asset that like every front end in the world wants to access, right? Like we're not just talking anymore about centralized exchanges versus decentralized exchanges. We're talking about Robinhoods, the Schwabs, the sort of like, your fintechs that exist in the lending context, Chime, all of these guys, Revolut. These are all front ends that effectively want to plug into as many services as possible to upsell their existing customer. And at that point, the protocol business is really strong because it's an integration and you have access to the entire liquidity of the protocol. But then at some point, right, if you're sort of like Uniswap Labs, or like if you're the Labs entity and you don't sort of capture all the upside from the protocol as much as you used to in the past, you're now thinking, okay, I still have a front end business. There's still attention. I need to also like figure out other ways to monetize, right? Like what are the other things that I can sell to this customer to monetize my front end business? And it's a very natural progression because protocols also mature, right? So is the front end supposed to be beholden to the AMM protocol or the Uniswap X protocol? Like which one is it, dog fooding? So that's why I think like you can just throw in anything over there. The front end business is the 25 bips per activity business. And it's a very, very valuable business.
So to conclude, bridging front ends won't die, but your bridging front end.
Not mine.
Not yours.
Not ours, but yours. Yours.
Okay, so the next one is the messaging versus intents debate was more marketing than substance.
From yesterday? Or like in broadly in
For the last 1 year.
I agree.
That's probably why it was started. It was like a strategic psyop from like the dark cabal, maybe, of such. But yeah, right? And who actually, might have been Mark. Mark had a good tweet about this once, right? With the difference between just kind of the narrative of how these two were positioned, right? And that like messaging is like like messaging is useful for like protocols, applications, like et cetera, such, and like intents, kind of like what we were going back to originally, is like really good for like small end user, frontward facing, et cetera. And kind of the idea that we like paralleled these in like the narrative for such a long time was like maybe this was like really good psyops from one team to like position it in a different light, et cetera. But I think everyone's kind of come more to the understanding of what these two things really are today.
I feel like whenever there's a new concept, there's a brief period of like 3 to 6 months where not everyone has the perfect understanding, right?
Yeah.
So you can play that period as you want, and then you can play a narrative to position yourself or like to get more attention. And I feel like a lot of that is what happened in this case.
I mean, what else was the timeline supposed to give a shit about in like a flat market, right? Like, we had these insane infra debates that were so meaningful only for like 100 of us in the fucking world. Like, it was the most pointless shit ever, if you think about it. But it was, you know, engagement. You know, we were in a different regime. We didn't really know how big the pie could get. So it felt like a sort of like, this is like a crypto to a petri dish almost, and this is all we have. And so we just want to be able to farm clicks amongst each other. If Kaito existed back then, I would say Hart and Brian would have been like right on the top of the leaderboard.
I think the positioning of Across versus Stargate, when that was popular on the timeline, obviously makes sense. Like to the end user, there is a similar experience there. I think today that looks very, very different. I think anyone who tried to pitch Across versus Layer 0 didn't understand the infrastructure that was being used.
Yes.
So we should go back to the tweets, look at the replies, and then like single out people.
Or just move on.
I think moving on.
Dude, like we had a debate yesterday about this topic, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to move on.
I think it's been beaten to death.
Yeah.
But I do think what Angus said in the debate was correct, right? Like, you don't get intense without like some level of message passing, right? Like, you how do you do it? And I think Josh tried to sort of like go around it with, you know, proofs and stuff like that. But messaging is still a bedrock of interop. It just depends on like, are you doing, you know, per intent message? Are you doing batch stuff? Are you then taking that message and, you know, generating a proof for it? But message is the substrate of it. So like, we should stop beating around the bush and accept that there's cool things these things can be symbiotic. They don't need to be so PvP.
Okay, let's leave it at that then.
I think how many statements have we done?
Like 6.
Well, I think we've all agreed on all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part.
This is not...
So should we just like disagree on the next
Yeah.
one for
Yeah,
the
let's
sake
see,
of
let's
it?
see.
Whatever you say next, you guys have to disagree.
All right.
You have to take the position of disagreeing.
And
we have to-
We have
Let me find the right statement.
Rule number 7.
Yeah.
I've got to do the other one.
Okay.
Okay, interop is solved. That's the
I agree.
statement.
Done.
I disagree.
Oh,
Perfect.
shit.
Here we go.
You agreed?
Yeah.
You kind of threw me under the bus, man. I agree.
Go ahead.
I feel like the statement has some substance, but it's too absolute for my liking for a problem that's ever expanding. So it can never be solved.
Sure.
I mean, no, you have to disagree.
No, sorry. So the positioning of Interop is solved is that all of the tooling that is needed to build an interop protocol or any sort of interoperable experience between different ecosystems exists today. I don't think developers are aware of all of the tooling. There are some really powerful things that can be built on both like messaging and LZ Read, for example. And I think especially post-launch of LZ Read, there are very few developers that I speak to that have an idea of something to build that I can't formulate an architecture for them. Because I think with something like Stargate, which enables liquidity balancing, with Layer 0 messaging, and with something like LZ Read, you can actually build the majority of cross-chain experiences that you want to with the tooling that exists today, and therefore interop is solved, and developers just need to go build the products.
Yeah, I think context is very important here. So like what you say makes sense. What I'm also saying makes sense.
Yeah.
But the thing is like as a statement in itself, of course, like outside our bubble, we want people to know that we have all the tools if you want to build something cool today. But inside our bubble, it's like, okay, is this the end state of interop? Probably not yet.
Yeah.
But I think that's why it's important to tell the narrative that interop is. We've always built for developers. Stargate V1 was only built to be like this omni-chain liquidity layer that like developers would plug into. And then it turns out it was quite a good retail bridge and was one of the few that served a couple different chains. And so like has a retail user base. But the tooling for developers is available and is important for them to know that it is available.
Yeah. But I will say, so I want to add a little bit of nuance to the part where I actually, now that I reflect on it, I do think it's more solved than less. Because you have this sort of, you know, historical approach of retail interop that is, you know, I think well taken care of with intents. It does, you know, have some issues to scale, but then when there's issues to scale, you have something like, you know, Stargate that comes in and sort of solves the scale problem. You also, I think the big thing that doesn't get bucketed in interop, but the one that we like the most and sort of that's what our model looks like, is actually tokenized interop. Athena is an example of this. What do, right? There's positions that exist between multiple domains that sort of are underlying USDE, and there's just a tokenized version of it that is distributed via OFT technology that makes that yield from Interop. Like, I mean, technically the yield comes from centralized exchange A and B, so they are interoperating those positions. There's margin management and there's sort of money that moves between both of those things. That's tokenized, simple asset, and is available on every chain that LZ supports. So I think that the model that actually starts to scale Interop and takes it from we have all the picks and shovels in place, now let's go build cool contextual products, is actually tokenization. And I think that's the sort of like next level, because we were at the Stable Summit before. Every single one of these trad institutions wants to have, be on DeFi. And they're going to do it through a combination of ways where they're sort of tokenizing their positions across multiple venues, whether it's CeFi or TradFi, and then they're going to distribute it on chain. And those things will either be, OFTs or something of the like. But to a large extent, I think Interop is solved. It's what we're trying to build now is context. Right? And I think that's the sort of next leg of Interop.
TK.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably. Well, I have to disagree, right? I have to disagree. No, I mean, I think I do legitimately agree more with you, which is where, yeah, externally we want everyone to know that we have stuff here today that you can come and use, and like for the most part, we have solutions to pretty much any sort of problem that you want to come and bring to the table in terms of what you're trying to build, what chain it is, no matter what, et cetera, right? But then internally within all of ourselves here, it's like, is this the final end state of where we think this lands? And like, probably not final end state, right? Even to the extent of just like what, like, is there never going to be a Stargate V3? Like, like, come on, like, you're never going to make it better. Like, you're just gonna stop here, right? Like,
have you retired already?
I definitely don't retire.
So like,
there are too many chains to retire.
It's like, is this the final end state? Like, I mean, I would be surprised, right? I'd be surprised if like what we see today and like all the developer docs that we've shipped to date between all these things are like never get updated. It's like, this is it, and like we're good to go, right? Like, it's just, this is everything.
For
like,
sure.
Like it's gonna, and like it's like not necessarily a bad thing either, right? It's just like every week someone's building and like iterating on something and coming out with a new way to make these things work together or integrate or use case, or it's like this is like a good thing functionally, right? But are we like close and like directionally and like it's solved? Probably. Does it mean it's actually solved? Like, probably not.
Like, I like the bigger picture approach here. Like, towards the outside ecosystem, they should know that we have all the tools.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's correct.
I mean, like, DeFi is not solved, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is
That's
not,
exactly.
this is
That's
not
what
the
I'm
user
trying to-
experience that we want to onboard.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to onboard the billions, but like, I think given what we have today, we've come a lot further than people make it out.
The only thing I will say that within our sort of current understanding of Interop and the tools that we have and the tools that work, there's sort of like one black swan is what if some really popular L2 decentralizes their sequencer and has an adversarial validator set. Like we don't know when that might happen. Like, for example, Polygon was the only one that did it to some extent, but like Alex from Fastlane was able to get all of them in one Telegram chat and get them to behave, right? And so the equivocation risk of Polygon was not that high. If you start to scale the intent model to a universe of chains which is ever expanding, and you're trying to get business at the edges, and suddenly one of them says, yeah, we're just like creating like a decentralized sequencer from day one, then there's like an economic cost of corruption over there, which becomes quite interesting. So does the intent model break if that happens? I don't know. Do L2s ever sort of decentralize their sequencer? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I would say like maybe there's some food for thought there where there's a level of like consensus mechanism innovation that can also protect Interop. And you see this with like more opinionated consensus designs like Hyperliquid does.
Yep.
So I think that's one aspect of Interop that doesn't get talked about enough, is like how can we enforce Interop at the consensus level between multiple chains, which I think is like interesting infrastructure for people to explore. It's just, it's hard to get like to L2s to talk about anything to do with sequencing, as teams have tried and have really struggled with that.
I think my next statement is sort of related. So, like, I hear the LZ gang talk a lot about single slot finality. So is that the magic bullet for Interop? Like, does that make everything faster, quicker, safer?
I think it makes life a ton easier. I think intents as a stopgap solution become a lot less interesting. If you can transfer unlimited size of any asset as an OFT between any chain you want, and all of them have single slot finality, and you can do it in a matter of seconds for $1 or $10 million, then I think, again, like the tools that we have just become so much better. And I really do think that like intents as a faster, cheaper mechanism for cross-chain swaps or cross-chain bridging is like the solution, because we needed to come up with a solution. Like, Stargate waits for source chain finality, and because of that we have some latency, and in order to like skirt around that, you could just like give the user and then optimistically give the user funds and then settle later. And you don't need to do that if you have single slot finality. And if you have OFTs, then you can do it for any asset. And so like this whole idea of solvers only holding USDC and ETH, and then you like swap in these like really illiquid AMM pools to give the user an asset and charge them 200 basis points is just not necessary anymore.
200 basis points is gone anyway. Or like 2 basis points if you're lucky.
For cross-chain swaps,
Cross-chain swaps, yeah.
If you're like swapping between two like pretty liquid assets on like a very high traffic pathway, you can. There have been large amounts of capital made from solving in that way.
I just want to ask a question about the single slot finality part, because I'm again more of a question of clarification, right? So when you make the commitment that you can basically move any amount of value for epsilon cost between venues, is the assumption here that there's sort of like some economic security that is guaranteeing the amount of value that passes, such that you can get this confirmation within a single slot? Like where does the hardness guarantee come from?
I think it comes from the like consensus mechanism that like once a block is finalized, which happens within the slot of one block, then that block cannot be reordered out.
So that consensus mechanism, is that Ethereum L1 consensus, or is that layer 0 consensus? Like
it would be at the L1 level.
Yeah,
like
it's the
actual
chain.
chain.
Okay.
Yes.
So I mean, Vitalik has spoken a lot about it as an idea for the Ethereum L1, and obviously at the moment Ethereum L1 will continue to have 12-second blocks, and so it's actually pretty uninteresting on the L1. I think the Espresso team are doing some super interesting things with like Arbitrum Orbit, single slot finality, or at least like faster finality.
Even faster than 250 milliseconds, or is this like
Well,
that
so
would be finality
the-
to L1 basically?
It is finality, for that L2, and so like finality on the Arbitrum 1 L2 is not one block. Like a block is 250 milliseconds, but that
Right.
block is not considered final
Correct.
for X amount of time,
But-
or X
but-
number of blocks.
Espresso will bring in finality from its confirmation that it gets
Yes.
from Ethereum's consensus, but not the entire consensus.
It's like a pre-confirmation, right? So like
So-
some sort of guarantee
Right,
that will
right.
happen, but there's no absolute
Right.
guarantee.
So it's like soft confirmation from
Yeah.
Arbitrum sequencer. Then you get a sort of pre-confirmation from a subset of Ethereum's consensus, which is considered sort of like a harder guarantee than the sequencer, but still a softer guarantee than Ethereum's sort of like finality part.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are a lot of teams working on it in a number of different ways, but TLDR, yes. Like
Okay.
It just means that for something like a message-based bridge, either OFTs or Stargate, instead of waiting for 20 blocks on some source chain before passing that message over, verifying with the DVNs, and then executing, you just wait for one block.
Okay.
And so therefore, like 250 milliseconds,
Right.
you then verify and execute. And so, again, any size moving, like
I mean, it also makes intents faster. Like
Yeah.
everything gets faster, pretty much.
I mean, to Angus's point, like at that point, if intents do get faster, they should also get cheaper. But can they get cheaper than single slot finality, or like a model in which like I don't know that there's a gap for the working capital anymore.
cheaper.
Okay, I'm just like I haven't game theorized what happens there.
But like in general, I think we can conclude single slot finality will improve interop experience and everything.
For sure.
Yeah.
100%.
For sure.
Another statement we've all agreed on.
Oh man, that sucks.
Okay.
Do you agree?
No, I entirely agree. I'm the Ethereum guy here too as well, right? But it's just when. That's my long term when.
Blobs have to like scale to like a ridiculous amount to give finality to every roll up that's trying to post state. Like who gets the single slot finality? Like does Arbitrum get it? Does Optimism get it? Does everybody get it? If there's like 1,000 L2s, how big does a blob need to be for everybody to get it? Like I think we're far away.
Yeah.
Yeah,
what
no,
I'm saying.
that's
why-
like Berachain, for example, well, obviously they have like a very unique L1 architecture and consensus mechanism, but like they have single slot finality. There's one block finality in Berachain. Every block that gets committed to Berachain is final,
Okay.
which is quite interesting.
Okay, I have two more.
All right,
Right.
let's
So
do
let's
that.
try to cover both of them. One is from a very popular Twitter article that went viral last week. And then it was talking about canonical asset issuance and how chains are now using interop token standards, right? But that sort of changes the trust assumptions.
Absolutely.
So like my statement or question would be around like, are the trade-offs for something like Stargate Hydra, are they overblown, or should we actually be more like critical about these things? Yeah.
I'll let you guys answer first.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the assumptions and conversation points that go around, right? I think the overarching topic of some of them are like worth discussion, like talking about and like worth having a discussion of. I think a lot of them are overblown and overplayed by maybe a misunderstanding of how lack of understanding of how some of these protocols work. So it's a bit of like a both, right? Where it's like I think it's worth having a discussion for some of this stuff, right?
Right.
But I think there's a lot of sensationalism like
Mm-hmm.
in regards to like when you go around and project it. You know, even just like in particular layer zero, right? Like vast majority of people who talk about layer zero, right, online, like don't really. And they've like they've read like a single page on a documents website, right? And they're like, oh, this is how like a DVN works, and then they
Yeah.
just like go out and start throwing hands, right? And it's like, yeah, but there's like a lot of nuance to this. There's like people who have like not only architected this entire thing and spent like years of their life working on it, right? And they can understand and like argue it. So I think it's worth having the conversations, and that they're not all just like entirely. I mean, everything has like security trade-offs
Yeah.
and security
Yeah.
assumptions and everything, right? And it's like just like honestly and transparently working through what those things are and what they actually mean versus a lot of it is just like kind of like sensationalist people
Yeah.
going crazy, throwing punches left and right, and it's just like no progress is being made in that regard, right? So
I may have missed the sort of meat of it, but was the critique around Stargate to do with one of two things, either sort of like multi-sig as well as the sort of like how
It's the same criticism, right? Like
Yeah.
how DVNs are multi-sigs, and I think the more important part over there was the fact that the assets have different security guarantees now, and people need to be aware of it. I agree with the fact that these things need to be
Right.
talked about from an
Yeah.
education
So
perspective.
Stargate USDC is different to USDC.
Yes.
That's
Correct.
that's the
Yes.
argument being
Yes.
made, and
And I don't think
Stargate
anyone,
USDC
no one,
is
like,
Yeah.
no one argues
Yeah.
otherwise. You know what I mean?
and
Yeah.
Stargate USDC is only as good as the Stargate multisig is what people are trying to reduce.
Whatever the DVN is being
I
used.
think the
like
crux
combination.
of the argument, I mean, the DVN being a multi-sig thing, I think we can skirt over to TK's point, but the crux of the argument was that the USDC that is issued out of Stargate's Hydra is different to the USDC that
Yeah,
you would hold
absolutely.
on Ethereum or
Yeah.
Base or Arbitrum. In the same way that like the USDC you hold on Base is different to the USDC you hold on
Sure.
Ethereum. Not because like they are both issued by Circle and you can redeem both of them through Circle Mint, but like the Base sequencer is who you are trusting when you are on Base L2 versus like the decentralized set of validators on Ethereum. And I think like we designed Stargate V, or when Stargate V1 was built and designed, it was like, oh my god, wrapped assets suck. They keep getting exploited. Let's only use native assets, only like where Circle is issued, only where Tether is issued. Let's build a protocol that only gives native assets.
Yeah.
Wrapped assets are terrible.
Yeah.
And then we launched 500 chains, and Circle launched on like 11 more chains.
Yep.
And so wrapped assets continue to exist. Wrapped assets continue to proliferate.
Yes.
The bet or the argument that we took when building Stargate V2 was that if wrapped assets are going to proliferate and if there are going to be more chains that exist, then the best place for those to be issued is out of the Stargate V2 protocol. And that is like our pitch is like with Hydra, you get a Stargate issued asset, you get access to USDC across all these other chains. These are the chains that we have pools on where like the underlying capital is held. It is a very open trust assumption. We very proudly talk about it in our docs. It is like a trade-off that was actively built into the protocol and like very consciously built. Every single smart contract that Stargate was built with this like trust assumption in mind. And like the pools are completely immutable for that reason. There is no
Right.
complex mathematics or fee logic or rehypothecation that exists within the smart contracts because we knew that was the trust assumption. Because we knew that we were going to go to chains that would have billions of dollars in TVL, and like we want the protocol to have billions of dollars of TVL. And if you do that and you are making these trust assumptions and these trade-offs, then like you have to build an immutable protocol that does not take additional risk. And so I agree. I think like the trade-off should be discussed, but I don't think there's a better solution.
I mean, I think so. A couple of things, right? So if I'm chain number 500 and Circle can only get to chain number 12, I'm pretty sure there's a pretty large bounty to be within the first 12 chains to get CCTP out from. I don't know what the going rate is, but I presume it's quite large. So the question then becomes like, do we want to have a greater design space to explore what a blockchain is without the sort of like budgetary constraints of just having like USDC or USDT on that chain? Because that's the UX that end users are used to. Right? Like they want to be able to interface in these things, and so to answer that question, it feels like as though Stargate is the not canonical but next best for 488
Yeah.
other chains that need to launch and explore this design choice. Because I think when they get enough traction, then they can probably get like CCTV as a part of their chain, and so. There is clearly a trade-off, and these things are sort of like transient, but experimentation shouldn't stop because you're sort of struggling to get native asset issuance. Right?
I think
So-
like it is difficult to scale infrastructure across many chains.
Yeah.
Looking at
Yeah.
TK over there, and,
Yeah.
and so like there is a reason that Circle are not on 500 chains, but
Yeah.
like
Wow.
there has to be some middle ground of someone
Yes.
that can be. And the author of the article hadn't read the documentation, but Stargate is built with the bridge to USDC standard, with the idea that like when Circle want to take it over, if they would like to take over a bridge to USDC asset, they can do so.
And the only thing I disagree with Angus about is the rehypothecation part. I think that's the notion that you should not rehypothecate, in my opinion, is incorrect because sort of like Tether and Circle both rehypothecate, and we're sort of assuming that like these guys are fantastic, and so USDC is perfect, but like USDC is not US dollars sitting in a bank account. It's like T-bills, money markets, all of that stuff. Tether, we don't necessarily know what is exactly under the hood.
I mean, if
There's
you
a bunch of
start
stuff.
questioning that, like then there's no crypto today.
So that's my point. It's like with something like Stargate that exists on chain, you have the ability to have attributable rehypothecation, which I think is very powerful as a substrate for capitalism. Like we don't have to conflate our desire to be cypherpunk and immutable with wanting to be a commie. Like we can still have protocols that make money, and it's important because we have an economics problem in crypto, right? Like how do we get more sort of DVNs, and where do the economics work out for like the more people to be incentivized to participate in securing these protocols? At some point it cannot just be emissions, right? It has to be something else, and then when it comes down to hard economics, it's basically like everything comes down to like fees and yield. Those are the only two ways to make money. And so at some point you're going to be faced with that conversation of, okay, I'm either making some economics through fees and yield to make this protocol scale, and arguably it's only the economics that allow these things to exist to the end of time. So this conversation that we're having about rehypothecation today will probably be a very different conversation 2 years from now. And I think like that's how crypto wins, is because you can have attributable rehypothecation.
I actually very strongly agree with you, but the space very strongly disagrees with you.
I think that's the problem is like the space is a petri dish. Like we have to think beyond. Like someone has to be able to say that, look, this is a risk that we're going to take on. And like the conversation with the whole like Morpho Polygon bridge thing was just silly in my opinion, right? Like it was just like Aave basically throwing a hissy fit because it was not, like this was something similar that Aave had even proposed in the past. And so rehypothecation is like, I come from a TradFi background, and a lot of people in TradFi ask me this question. They're like, okay, I understand this whole crypto stuff, and like it's cool you have this stable rails and stuff like that, but you do understand that the entire history of modern economics is not collateralized. It's basically tokenized commitments. Like do you know how Circle makes its money? It's because the Fed prints more money.
Are you telling me the US dollar in the bank is not 1:1 bank?
You want to know? You want to know how bad the House of Cards is? The House of Cards is so bad that like, if there was like a bank run at scale where all of a sudden people decided to ask some question of their own bank accounts and decide, I'm going to withdraw all my money and I want to chuck it into money market funds and I want to chuck it into like something else, they will not be able to do it. Not JP Morgan, not Bank of America, not Goldman Sachs. This entire financial system we've built is a series of obligations. It's not collateralized. So in crypto, we need to understand this, is that we need to expand our mental model that if we're supposed to eat the entire civilization, we need more supply of like money to do that. Like you cannot have a movement where you're able to do loans for the developing world and improve the quality of life if the system doesn't have some element of risk. If the system has no element of risk, we will just exist as like a very like small little bubble, cute thing that people play around with, funding rate arbitrage that exists because of like exchanges, but we would have never exported anything else. So I get a little passionate about this because I was a credit guy in my past life.
So if you think Stargate's Hydra is back, go check out JP Morgan.
Existential crisis aside, like let's move on to the last question. Right? So in this world, like at the end of the day, order flow and liquidity are the only moats. That's the statement, and I wholeheartedly agree with it.
Okay, in this world of Interop.
In general,
In this world.
It has to be,
Like in DeFi.
bridges and Interop related. This
Yes.
is bridge out.
Okay.
yes,
Order flow and liquidity.
yes.
Can we say that Layer 0 has either order flow or liquidity?
I think Stargate's front end has a lot of, or Stargate as a protocol has a lot of order flow and also a lot of
Right.
liquidity.
But it benefits from Layer 0, which has none technically, right? Like
Yeah.
if you
I mean,
decouple-
layer 0 gets the distribution though. Like
So distribution is the third thing then, right?
order flow
Relation
distribution
to
is the
distribution,
same thing.
order
Yeah.
flow. I think liquidity is a huge moat.
Mhm.
That's
I'm not surprised you would say that, but
Yeah.
And I think to one of the first questions we discussed, like that is where the intense model has also really struggled, is like generating actual liquidity. You can do small size transfers and that's great for any chain, but like if you really want to bridge, like you could not have done Boico using an intense-based model.
True.
Because nobody's going to front you
Yep.
$1 billion of capital in Barra chain. So I think liquidity is a very big moat, and I think order flow is actually
It's a flywheel.
Yeah, I
If
think,
you like-
yeah.
I think order flow is a big moat, but like the way bridges get order flow is through aggregators. So like, how much of the top bridges actually?
I mean, if
own
you look
order
at the
flow?
top bridges,
Yeah.
their moat is actually, or like their order flow actually comes from beyond the aggregator.
yeah.
Okay.
For Stargate, for example, we do between $8 and $15 million through Li-Fi every day. Our daily volume at the moment is like 80 to 100.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
10-ish
Just the
percent.
top of the top, yes. Like initially, they need an aggregator to actually bootstrap order flow. That's why I say like the order flow is most important because without order flow, you can't really go up
Right.
in like numbers.
Right.
Even for liquidity, you need the order flow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think liquidity begets liquidity, but also order flow begets liquidity. So
Mhm.
Is there some insight from you guys at Li.Fi where sort of like how tightly coupled is the order flow for a bridge, dependent on how long they've been integrated within Li.Fi? Like, is there like a point at which when you're first integrated, all your order flow comes, and then after a certain point, because
No.
the user's seeing it that
It doesn't matter at all. Like if you have a bad bridge per se, it's going to stay the same throughout. But if you have like new routes, if you have something unique, only then you can actually like go up win order flow. Like that's why we're not really interested in adding the 15th EVM
Yes.
bridge, right?
Right.
Because
Yes.
it doesn't help them, it doesn't help us. The users don't even see it.
Yep.
What's the point then?
Gonna quote like the fifth quote, like you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
route that
Yeah.
exists everywhere.
Yeah.
there are
exactly.
like there are probably 4 or 5 bridges that do volume on
Like
Li-Fi.
6 at this point. But that if you actually go more granular, you'll see like there are different models of
Yeah.
the same bridge.
Yeah.
Like Stargate has 2, mine has 3.
Yeah.
Then there's like
Yep.
relay,
Yep.
there's across
Yeah.
CCTP.
right.
Yeah,
Interesting.
but the interesting thing about aggregators, and we saw this when Stargate V2 went live in Li-Fi, like
Yeah.
immediately became the first or second bridge. Same with Relay. When Relay became part of Li-Fi's routing,
Within an
immediately
hour, you
became-
can like see the competition changing, and you can
Oh,
see
yeah.
like other protocols actually changing their fees and everything.
Yeah.
Within the sort of the structure that you've created for us, which is order flow and liquidity, what does CCTP's moat look like within those two? Like order flow is certainly
I mean,
not
so
it. right?
again, with mint and burn
Yeah.
infrastructure, liquidity is actually yours, right?
Right.
Like you own the liquidity.
So the
You can
moat
just-
is asset issuance then,
Yes.
clearly.
I mean, if you
Right.
go a layer deeper, then anyone who controls the asset issuance is
Yes.
like,
Okay. so that was what I was sort of like nudge us on to. Like,
yes,
the-
yes.
the
I don't want to
order flow
say
is
it
not-
directly.
yeah.
Well, it also ties back to the initial question about like, are intents the solution for bridging? No, they're not, because if you are today a solver offering an intents-based bridging on Berachain, like you are underlying using Stargate to balance, and you have to do that. There is no other alternative, really.
Like we have intent-based
Or
bridges
centralized
that
exchanges.
basically wait for Stargate to go live because like somebody has to rebalance.
Yeah. I mean, or you can use Binance.
Yes, of
If
course.
if Binance offer
Yes.
that,
Correct.
and like even if Binance were to accept USDC on Berachain, for example, Binance would then use Stargate to balance.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I mean. I'm sitting in Sam's chair technically, and that was sort of like Mark's thing was they can just use centralized exchanges to rebalance. And
Yes.
Be really quick to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So is order flow or liquidity or asset issuance the moat?
I would actually, again, like distribution is also order flow.
Yeah.
So I would keep those things as one. And then
Yeah.
liquidity is asset
Slash,
issuance,
yeah.
right? So it's the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. So I think asset issuance is where I stand very clearly.
Any last comments from anyone about like interop in general or how we're feeling about where the ecosystem is at?
I am very, very happy this week with the amount of conversations I'm having about Interop.
Mhm.
Like every single side event that I go to has an Interop panel. The fact that the Ethereum Foundation, or maybe it was just Optimus and Arbitrum, but like throwing an Ethereum Interop offsite and having like all of the founders of all of the L2s sit in a 10-man room and discuss how to solve Interop is really cool.
That was nice.
I put out a tweet yesterday and I said that I think the sheer amount of brain power of teams that are working on various aspects of the Interop stack specifically to solve Ethereum's problems, Ethereum would do well to sort of try to nationalize at least some of them, because there's a bunch of IP that sits in all of these teams that could accelerate the roadmap for Ethereum quite a bit. My sort of last, sort of food for thought for anybody that may or may not be listening from the EF is to seriously consider some sort of, M&A style approach to accelerate the roadmap, because there's very, very talented teams that have built extremely cool stuff that have struggled to get these into the mainstream because of how much, ossification has happened at the core developer level, and it totally makes sense. But when you have this gigantic asset that has the ability to sort of like, emit and inflate, as any good sort of currency should, you want to make sure that you're pointing those into the direction of those pieces of infrastructure that are exponential for the GDP of that particular sort of like nation. And I do think there's like a bunch of teams right now that could do with having the, being nationalized by the EF, because taking this as a for-profit undertaking is like going to be quite challenging.
Yeah. I mean, whether that happens or not, I'm not putting my money on that. But
Yeah, I mean, nobody should, but yeah.
Any last words?
No, I think this was actually a pretty good overview of like state of affairs of the last like 4 weeks and like talking points, etc. Probably more towards what Angus is saying is just, particularly here and in the last couple of weeks, it's been, there's been a lot of conversations being had. I think we're doing, a relatively good job at continuing to discuss these types of things, getting them out there, not letting it die, right? Like, continuing to make this just a subject of conversation in regards to these people and such. And it's a lot different than even 5 months ago, 6 months ago, right?
The reason I enjoy these conversations so much, and Arjun, you and I speak about this a lot, is like we have been thinking about Interop for a long time. Like a lot of these protocols have been around for years and years, and thinking about these solutions before they were like as needed as they are today. And so it's fun to see all of the developments that are occurring today, but also sometimes frustrating that like to your point, there's a lot of IP and knowledge within the industry already that maybe isn't being as tapped as it should be.
Okay, but like in the end, it's really nice to see that people are speaking our language.
Yeah.
So I'll take that.
I think what people that have sort of struggled with their mental models around Interop could do as an exercise that might make it quite binary is just look at a centralized exchange, just look at Binance, look at every token pair that trades over there, and see the spot assets that trade on that exchange. If you have to replicate that in DeFi, there's no single chain that can do the spot trading volume of all of those tokens that trade on Binance. So then Interop starts to feel very binary. It's just like, okay, I just need to be able to, if I have to replicate the same liquidity depth of spot trading that Binance has for every token that Binance has, how do I do it without Interop? You can't. So Interop is the only thesis.
Accelerate it. It's fine.
Yes, I agree.
TLDR, get some jumper hats.
They don't even have our logo, by the way.
I'm wearing
one's-
it.
the
I
other
like
one-
that it doesn't have your logo, to be honest.
The other one, the one I had yesterday, but
yeah.
I would very, very happily wear jumper hats.
But thanks for doing bridge yapping in real life. This was a fun conversation as always.
absolutely.
Hopefully someone can get some nice takeaways about Interop from our yapping.
I hope so.
I mean, if you're watching this and you're like a builder, do not build another intent-based bridge. Like that's my only piece of advice to you is like, please,
Agreed.
for God's sake, do not do this.
Build anything you want.
No, don't. I'm putting it on the line, being prescriptive. Don't do it.
I will not solve for you.
Awesome.
Right.